Jimmy Johnson, the Hall of Famer, he has a new book called Swagger, Super Bowls, Brass Balls, and Footballs, a memoir recounting his great career, life, and lessons on winning. You can get your copy online wherever books are sold. Jimmy, good to have you back on. What's the worst weather you ever coached in?
Oh, Dan, well, when I was at University of Pittsburgh, we had a couple of feet of snow when we played Penn State. And a few cold games when I was with the Cowboys going up to play the Giants, but really no horrible weather. I wasn't half the coach when we were in bad weather. I looked like the Michelin man on the sideline trying to stay warm.
That's why you took the Miami job.
Exactly right. That's why I live in the Florida Keys.
Tougher to replace Tom Landry or Don Shula?
Well, you got to, both of them great coaches, but, Tom Landry had three straight losing seasons. And his last season before we got there was 3-13, which was the worst in the league. And so I think people were ready, to make a move. And, when I got there, like I said, he's a great football coach, but they just didn't have any talent. And going Shula, they got beat in the playoffs, right before, and people talked to him about him retiring as well. Obviously, difficult replacing either one of them. But I always told people, I said, hey, they both were great coaches, Hall of Fame coaches, but just let me do my thing.
What was it that you did that was different?
Yeah, the one thing that I always tried to, really concentrate on was, bringing in talent, evaluating talent. And that's, we have people come down to the Keys, coaches, general managers, owners, not only football, but, baseball, people, basketball people. And they say, what was the key for you as far as evaluating talent in building a team? And so, when I was at Oklahoma State, when I was at University of Miami, I was my own personnel director. And I personally evaluated the players before we ever signed them or drafted them, et cetera. And so I think personnel was as much as anything else in building a team.
Okay, but how do you do that? I mean, it's all in the eye of the beholder, but you were seeing something that was different than a lot of other coaches and GMs were.
Well, I emphasize certain things. Number one was intelligence. I mean, you look at the first four picks, when I went to the Cowboys, Troy Aikman, academic All-American. Daryl Johnston, academic All-American. Mark Stebnowski, academic All-American. Tony Tolbert, academic All-American. That's in the first four rounds. And, those players get better and better. You don't have the problems off the field. They improve as time goes on, and they really contribute. I always said, I look for five things. I said, number one is intelligence. Number two, I wanted a gym rat. I wanted somebody that was going to compete, somebody that making a difference. It was shooting pool or pick up basketball. They wanted to compete. And the other thing is I wanted a worker that had passion for what they were going to do, that would willing to work around the clock. R.C. Buford, for instance, general manager of the Spurs, he's been down here twice. And he said, Pop's going to retire one of these days. Would you be concerned about a college coach? What do you look for in hiring somebody? I said, it's no different than what I talk to companies about, in hiring workers and, hiring people for any company. I said, give me somebody that's intelligent. Give me somebody that's got passion for the job, that really wants to put themselves totally into it. And give me somebody that's willing to work around the clock to get the job done. I don't care what they know. If they don't know anything about the job, they'll learn what to do, and they'll learn how to do it. So give me those three things, and you're going to have somebody that's going to be successful.
Why write a book now?
Well, first of all, with all the people coming down to the Keys, my attorney, Nick Christen, said, hey, you got to write the story. And then after I got into it, and we started not only talking about the talent and building the team, we started talking about the struggles that I went through and my family went through. Both of my sons played football. I never saw either one of them play a game. And, the book was almost an apology to my sons and my family that, hey, I would have liked to have been there for you, but I was always trying to win a championship. I always felt like I had to outwork the opposing coach. And so in some ways it was apology to my family. And I talked to my boys about it, and they said, "Hey, Daddy," says, "we understand we would have loved to have had you there. But by the same token, we benefited from all those, successes that you had." Like the one son, Chad, in fact, there's a chapter in the book about it. He suffered through alcoholism for many years. And he went through recovery and started a rehab center in St. Petersburg, Tranquil Shores. Now he's got a second one right outside of Austin, Tranquil Hills, super successful. And it's really, really rewarding for me to go put that in the book.
But how much did you beat yourself up over that? Do you take responsibility in some way that your son became an alcoholic?
I don't know that, my wife Rhonda said, "Hey, you were too hard on yourself, and you took too much responsibility for that." But the only thing I say, Dan, is if I'd have been there, maybe I could have nipped it in the bud. Probably the most emotional I think I've ever been. They have a client reunion there at Tranquil Shores, and I've been there 3 or 4 times. And they have the mothers and daddies of the clients that are in recovery go up and speak at the podium. And mothers and daddies will get up there. I'll be sitting next to Chad there in the audience, and they'll say, "Chad, thanks for saving my son's life." One lady got up and said, "Chad, you picked up my daughter at 2 o'clock in the morning, drove her around for 4 hours, talking to her, counseling with her, and then took her to detox. Thanks for saving my daughter's life." I mean, I'm sitting there teared up, sitting next to Chad, and then I've got to talk. I've got to finish it up. And I said, "Listen, I won national championships. I won Super Bowls." And I said, "Nothing that I've ever done can compare to what y'all are doing, saving lives."
Well, you look at and I've talked about this on my show about being at SportsCenter. I was working second shift for 15 years and missed out on an awful lot. And you never, my wife said, "Stop beating yourself up." But it's hard to say that. And, your kids, I have 4 kids, but you hold it in and you're like, God, was I selfish? And you sort of try to find the balance there. And I don't know if there's a balance in what we do or coaching and other professions.
I speak to companies all the time, and I visit with the CEOs and the presidents and et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that I found out, people that are really successful, ahead of these companies, they don't put in just 40 hours. They sacrifice.
Yeah.
They have their struggles, just like. So it's not just in sports. It's not just head football coaches. I think sometimes head football coaches take it a little bit to the extreme, sleeping in the office and stuff. But really, anybody really successful, they got to put their whole body into it. It can't be just a 40-hour week.
He's Jimmy Johnson, the Hall of Famer, and the new book is Swagger, Super Bowls, Brass Balls, and Footballs, a memoir. You can get it online wherever books are sold. I've spoken about this many, many times on the show, that not everybody who's a great coordinator should be a head coach. The difference between being a coordinator and a head coach on a day-to-day basis is what?
Ryan Dable called, and we talked for about an hour. And he said, "What's the best advice you can give me?" I said, "Brian," "you've been a great coordinator, X's and O's and, schemes." I said, "But when you had walked down that hall, nobody cared. Nobody gave a damn." I said, "But now you're the head coach. You're the leader. You walk down that hall and every head will turn. If you're going to get the best out of the organization, you've got to have interaction. Because let me tell you what, no one wants to be ignored by the leader." And I said, "You've got to have interaction with the secretary, with the administrative assistant, with their backup offensive guard, with the intern coach. It doesn't always have to be upbeat and positive, but I have some interaction. Make sure everybody's on the same page." And I was so impressed with Brian. One of the things he said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "In fact, I took pizza down to the equipment guys just the other day." And I said, "Yeah, get them all on the same page."
But you put in more time, college or NFL, as far as a head coach?
Bradshaw asked me on the show one time and said, "How about the difference in two?" I said, "Terry, there's not a world of difference between college coaching and pro coaching. There's a galaxy of difference. It is, I mean, the length of the season. When you're the head coach of a college, especially one of those top 12 schools, you're a father figure, you're a mentor. You got young kids that left home for the first time in their life. They got girlfriend problems. So you're in your office counseling them. Now in professional football, hey, it's the parity, it is so close between the best and the worst. If you don't go out there and play well, you're going to get beat. But that doesn't happen. In the top colleges, they have so much more talent than the teams they're playing. My wife Rhonda could have won 10 games at the University of Miami. But if you don't play well in pro football, you're going to get beat.
When you retired, give me the job that you almost came back out of retirement for.
Well, first of all, when I left Dallas, and I did Fox for a couple of years, Philadelphia, Jeffrey Lurie, who's a good friend, he talked to me a couple of different times, and I thought long and hard about it. And then McKay with Tampa, I thought long and hard about that one. Tom Benson came down. Bob McNair came down. Houston, New Orleans, and I thought about it. Philadelphia was one that I kind of was interested.
Any college jobs?
But the bottom line was I wanted to live here in South Florida, so that's why I ended up taking the Dolphin job.
Did you think about going back to the U at all? Any point?
Oh no, yeah. I mean, I love University of Miami, and they're struggling right now, but I think they got the right head coach with Mario Cristobal. I think they will be fine in time, but this is a struggle this year.
It's amazing. You've done all these things, but you're still identified as the former Cowboys head coach, it feels like. I mean, that's the power of that brand. Do you give unvarnished opinions about the Cowboys? Or is there part
question? Sometimes the problem is anytime I say anything about the Cowboys, positive or negative, that's going to be a headline in Dallas. And I mean, hey, I'm not always right. Obviously, no one's always right. But they're going to ask my opinion, and I'm going to give it. I mean, I actually said a week ago I thought this was the best Cowboy team that I'd seen in a while. Now they played poorly against Green Bay. They turned the ball over. They didn't play good run defense, and that was a disappointment. But I think this is a talented Cowboys team. And in the NFC, there's 4 or 5 teams that any one of the 5 could be in the Super Bowl. I don't think there's a great team in the NFC.
Yeah.
And so any one of the 5 could make it.
There are a lot of coaches, former coaches, front office people that were deeply offended that Jeff Saturday moved in front of the line for the Colts. You, as a former coach and now analyst, your reaction?
I don't know that I was offended. I understand it. In professional football, only one vote counts, the guy that owns the team. And he can hire whoever he wants to hire. And I don't think we should be surprised by any of them hiring, because some of those guys that own the team, maybe they don't make good decisions. Now, Jeff Saturday, really a good guy. He's been around football a long time, even though he hasn't coached other than high school. I would say that, there's hundreds of black and white coaches out there. They're a lot more qualified, but I wasn't offended.
Yeah, people jumped on it, and then he ends up winning that game. And then I wondered, sometimes as a head coach, you have to let others do their jobs. When you get to Sunday, just do your job. Maybe you don't coach as much on Sunday as you do during the week. Does that make sense?
Well, the one thing Jeff Saturday did, he put Matt Ryan back in there at quarterback. So
Yeah.
that made a big difference. I mean, please. So that he made one good decision there. And being the head coach, I think it's the longevity is what you've got to look at. I mean, it's a very difficult job. You've got to deal with a lot of different people from diverse, backgrounds. You got to deal with those assistant coaches. You got to deal with, 50 or 60 players. So there's a lot more to it than just coaching one game.
Is there a Michael Irvin story in the book?
Oh, I'm sure Michael's in there somewhere. We've got Michael Irvin stories. We got Alonzo Highsmith stories. Hey, One time before we played Oklahoma, we got some stories about them calling Brian Bosworth. And then we got Worldwide West and Leon Rose. They drove my Corvette from the NFC Championship game to Atlanta before the Super Bowl. We've got a lot of good stories in there.
What's the craziest story, though, that you ever encountered?
The craziest story, well, actually, the craziest story of when I was at the University of Miami is when Melvin Bratton and Alonzo and Jerome Brown, them called Brian Bosworth before we played the morning before pregame meal and said, "Hey, guys, you awake? You awake? Well, we're fixing to kick your ass." And then they come running to me in the pregame meal and say, "Coach, guess what we did?" Well, what am I going to say? I'm not going to jump onto them. And which they did. But that was part of swagger. Michael Irvin said, "Hey, part of swagger." And he said, "What we did," he said, we're going to tell you we're going to kick your rear end. Then we're going to kick your rear end. And then later on, we're going to talk about kicking your rear end." But he didn't say rear end.
Yeah, I'm sure. But coaching somebody like Mike, who, had great passion, but you always probably knew that you could get a phone call at night that Mike might be in trouble.
Michael never was a problem. Now, I think after I left, he got off the rails just a little bit. But it was funny, like if I hollered at Emmett would go into a shell. I wouldn't get anything out of him the rest of practice. If I hollered at Michael, I could cuss him like a sailor. He had just worked that much harder. I hollered at Charles Haley a few times. Charles came in my office and he said, "Coach, I love playing for you. Just don't embarrass me in front of the other players." So you had to know how to deal with each individual.
How about Troy?
I never hollered at Troy. Are you crazy?
I still love that story, and I'm paraphrasing, but when you said that if somebody fell asleep in a meeting, I'd cut him, but if Troy fell asleep in a meeting,
I tell him to wake up. It's simple. I told every team, I said, "Listen, I'm going to be very consistent. I'm going to treat every single one of you differently." And I said, "How I treat you? The harder you work, the more you meet the rules and regulations, the more you do what I ask you to do, and the better player you are, the higher you are up on the scale. If you don't do those things, you're not a good player. You got no margin of error."
It's great to talk to you. The book is Swagger, Super Bowls, Brass Balls, and Footballs. We're talking to Jimmy Johnson, and get your copy online wherever books are sold. You look great, sound great, and hopefully you do well with the book. Thank you again, Jimmy.
All right, Dan. Hey, enjoy talking with you.
That's Jimmy Johnson, Hall of Famer. Take a break. Get phone calls coming up. Mike Krzyzewski coming up next hour.